special athlete, a hellacious competitor, is Chris Benoit.
Chris Benoit found dead in his Atlanta home along with his wife and young son.
They say they cannot believe this has happened.
What role steroids played in the Benoit murder-suicide, the tragedy has made clear. Both have...
I have battled and lost.
On June 24th, 2007, the wrestling world woke up to a tragedy that would forever change its history. Chris Benoit, the former WWE World Heavyweight Champion, was now a part of one of the most horrifying events in wrestling history. In a shocking turn of events, Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel were found dead in their Fayetteville, Georgia, home. What seemed like an ordinary tragedy quickly turned into something much darker, a triple homicide followed by Benoit's own suicide. This wasn't the man fans knew and loved. This was something else. But why? What would drive a hero to commit such a horrific act? Today we're taking a look into the details of that weekend and what caused a WWE hero to commit a murder-suicide. Benoit was known as a devoted family man, especially by those closest to him. To the wrestling world, though, he was a powerhouse, one of the biggest names in the sport. At 40 years old, he was on the rise, taking on fight after fight. The rabid Wolverine was especially beloved in his home country of Canada, where it seemed he could balance his brutal in-ring persona with being the perfect father at home. Wrestling icon Chris Jericho once said, "Chris was always very much a great father, very much about his family." But Benoit had a demanding life. In wrestling, careers are often shorter than in other fields, a reality driven by the dangerous nature of the sport. Even though the matches are scripted, the physical toll is real. Wrestlers get banged up, often enduring injuries that would sideline anyone else. Still, they push themselves to perform as many matches as possible during their limited window of opportunity. Benoit was no exception. He was always on the road, jumping from one ring to the next, no matter how far he traveled. If there was a show, he was there. That's what made what happened on June 23, 2007, all the more shocking. Leading up to the tragedy, Chris Benoit's behavior began to raise serious concerns among those closest to him. As a seasoned wrestler, Benoit was no stranger to the demands of the WWE schedule, but in the days before his family's death, something changed. On June 22, 2007, Benoit was scheduled to travel to a WWE event in Houston, Texas, but he missed his flight, which was highly unusual for him. Chavo Guerrero, a close friend and fellow wrestler, was the first to notice that something was off. When Benoit finally reached out to him, his voice sounded strange, almost disconnected. During the phone call, Benoit showed his love for Chavo in a way that wasn't normal and that got him really concerned. Benoit then explained that his wife, Nancy, had been vomiting blood, and that their son, Daniel, was also seriously ill. This was more than enough to worry anyone, and it seemed like a reasonable explanation for his absence. Chavo thought that it was likely a temporary situation and hoped to catch up with Benoit when they eventually met in Houston. But the next day, Benoit's behavior became even more bizarre. He left a series of odd voicemails for Chavo, apologizing for missing the show, but assuring him that he would catch the next flight to Houston. The voicemail didn't sound like Benoit, though. His tone was off, and his words seemed somewhat erratic. He also mentioned that he would be in Houston by 8 a.m., which was inconsistent with the time he would have needed to make the flight. What seemed like a simple family emergency had quickly turned into something alarming, and Chavo wasn't the only one who noticed. Others in the WWE community were beginning to worry that something bad was about to happen. Benoit mentioned that he had missed his flight and would be late to the WWE event in Beaumont, Texas, which was unusual since he was a professional who was always on time. He sounded groggy and exhausted and ended the message with an "I love you." It wasn't something Benoit typically said to a colleague, and it raised red flags. At first, Chavo tried to brush it off, thinking maybe Benoit is just overwhelmed with his sick family and all the care he's been providing. But something still felt off. So, just 12 minutes after receiving the voicemail, Chavo called him back, only to get no answer. He left a message asking Benoit to call him back ASAP. At 3:44 p.m., Benoit returned the call and explained he missed the first call because he was changing his flight to a later time. Chavo was still uneasy and asked if something else was going on. Benoit brushed it off, claiming it had been an extremely stressful day and that his family suddenly falling ill had worn him out. But Chavo didn't buy it because he had known Benoit long enough to know there was more to the story, but he decided not to push. They'd talk later, after the fight. Chavo ended the call with, "All right, man, if you need to talk, I'm here for you." Why was he acting this way? At 3:51 a.m. on Sunday, June 24, Chavo and Scott Armstrong, both close friends of Benoit, received more odd texts from him. One of the messages contained the address of Benoit's family home, while the other mentioned that his dogs were safely locked in their enclosure near the pool and that the garage door was still open. The texts were strange, but it was 3:51 a.m., so no one thought much of it. They figured it was just an accident and went back to sleep. Chavo assumed Benoit had just made a mistake. A few hours later, Chavo was standing outside Houston Airport, waiting for Benoit to arrive. But hours passed, and he never showed. WWE officials took the next step and called the Fayetteville police to perform a welfare check on Benoit and his family. On Monday, June 25, 2007, the WWE was getting ready for Raw in Corpus Christi. Johnny Ace was shown texts sent from Benoit and Nancy's phones early Sunday morning. These were texts that didn't exactly sound like they were coming from someone in the right frame of mind. With no word from Benoit, WWE called in the Fayetteville police for a welfare check. By 4:15 p.m., they got the call. 3 bodies were found in the Benoit house, and the scene was officially labeled a major crime scene. The bodies of Chris, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel were found in different parts of the house. The murders of Nancy and Daniel were a nightmare. On Friday, June 22, 2007, Benoit murdered his wife in the bonus room of their Fayetteville home. Police later revealed that Nancy's limbs were bound before her death, with her arms tied with coaxial cables and her feet duct taped together. In the kitchen trash, they found a balled-up tube sock and tape, soaked in dried blood. Authorities believed it was used as a makeshift gag before Nancy was killed. Her body was discovered wrapped in a blanket next to a Bible. The injuries showed that Benoit had pressed his knee into her back while pulling a cord around her neck, strangling her. But there were no signs of a struggle leading up to her death, and toxicology reports found alcohol in Nancy's system. But it was unclear whether it was consumed before her death or because of decomposition. The decomposition also made it hard to determine the levels of hydrocodone and alprazolam that were present in her body. But the medical examiner found no evidence that Nancy was as sedated as their son had been before he was killed. Daniel was Benoit's 3rd child and 2nd son, who was found dead in his bedroom the following day, June 23, 2007. Daniel had 2 older siblings from Benoit's first marriage and was Nancy's only child. He was suffocated, and another Bible was found next to his body. But there were no bruises. The internal injuries to his throat confirmed the cause of death. Reports concluded that Daniel had been sedated with Xanax and was unconscious at the time of his death. His body had started decomposing, but it wasn't nearly as bad as his mother. Just hours before taking his own life on June 24, 2007, Benoit's internet searches raised serious questions about what he was planning. Among the final searches were how to tie a knot for hanging and how long it would take for a body to decompose. These types of searches are proof of a man who wasn't spiraling in confusion but preparing for something diabolical. The last known photograph of Benoit, taken on June 22, 2000, captured him at Dr. Phil Aston's office, which would precede the nightmare about to unfold. Investigations later revealed Benoit had searched for ways to break a neck. A disturbing detail disclosed by his former fiancée, Nancy Toffaloni, during a 2016 podcast. However, the Fayette County Sheriff's Office report didn't confirm these searches, and Benoit's autopsy didn't show neck injuries. Then there was the note, a final message found in a Bible next to the bodies of his wife and son. It simply read, "I'm preparing to leave this earth." No one knew exactly what it meant, but it felt like a final goodbye, maybe even a confession, as if Benoit was trying to make sense of what he had just done. The note was later sent to his first wife, Martina, and their 2 children in Canada. Benoit's father, Michael, confirmed it existed, suggesting the tragedy was planned rather than impulsive. The Bible found beside Nancy and Daniel as well only added to the dark nature of the scene. The note reflected guilt, while others saw it as Benoit finally coming to terms with his actions. In his final days, Benoit's life was overshadowed by darkness. Years of head injuries from wrestling had taken a severe toll on his brain, and the emotional weight of losing his close friend Eddie Guerrero seemed to push him further into despair. His mental state had gotten worse, and this combination of physical and emotional struggles ultimately led to one of the most tragic and disturbing events in wrestling history. He was found in his home gym hanging from a pulley system with a towel around his neck. The weight of the gym equipment caused his neck to snap instantly. He removed the bar from a lat pull-down machine in his gym and fashioned a noose from the machine's cable. After releasing the weights, he strangled himself to death. It was a brutal, shocking way to end his life. No one could have expected it, especially after what he'd done to his own family. Toxicology reports on Benoit showed elevated testosterone levels, consistent with steroid use. They also found traces of Xanax and hydrocodone, which led to more questions. Was he under the influence when he murdered Nancy and Daniel? It's impossible to know for sure, but his mental state in those final days clearly wasn't stable. Looking at the crime scene, the autopsies and the toxicology reports prove this was a methodical crime. Benoit took days to kill his wife, his son, and finally himself. Steroids were found in the Benoit house, which means roid rage might have been behind his actions. Some doctors have connected steroid use to uncontrollable anger and other psychological issues, including paranoia. Authorities also noticed a big gap between the deaths of Nancy and their son Daniel, which suggests that the murders were deliberate rather than out-of-control anger, and placing a Bible next to each body isn't consistent with a violent outburst. Prosecutors in New York began looking into Benoit's deliveries from Signature Pharmacy and MedXLife.com, companies that sold steroids and HGH online. Terrence Kindlon, the lawyer for MedXLife co-owner Gary Brandwine, denied the accusations that his client had sold steroids to Benoit. Sports Illustrated later reported that 3 packages from Signature Pharmacy were sent to Benoit, with the first arriving in December 2005 at a Texas address. A second was sent in February 2006 to Peachtree City, Georgia, and the third in July 2006 to Fort Walton Beach, Florida. This was part of a broader investigation into steroid use among wrestlers that named several other wrestlers, including Kurt Angle, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Edge, and Gregory Helms. After the Benoit family tragedy, everyone wanted answers, but the more authorities looked into it, the more questions they found. By the time they discovered the bodies of Nancy and Daniel Benoit on June 25, 2007, the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, but the picture never really came together. The investigation was straightforward enough. Benoit murdered his wife and son before ending his own life. But something felt off. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. The scene was unsettlingly calm. Nancy's hands and feet were bound, and a Bible was found next to her and Daniel. Was this a sign of Benoit's breakdown? Or was he trying to make some twisted sense of what he'd done? Then there were the searches. Benoit's internet history was, well, disturbing. He'd Googled how to break a neck and how long it takes for a body to decompose. and the final search was on how to tie a knot for hanging. Benoit spent his last hours meticulously planning everything. Forensics didn't exactly clear things up. Benoit died from hanging with no broken neck, like some had speculated. Instead, he used a towel and pulley system in his home gym. Was this an attempt to control his death, or just a sign of impaired judgment? We'll never know for sure. The toxicology report showed elevated testosterone levels that proved long-term steroid use, but it wasn't just the drugs. Benoit's autopsy revealed early signs of dementia and CTE. This was brain damage from years of hits to the head. CTE messes with your behavior, causes mood swings, and can lead to violence. Could that have been the tipping point? To top it all off, Eddie Guerrero, Benoit's best friend, died 2 years earlier, and many believe that loss pushed him over the edge. Eddie's passing hit him hard, and people close to Benoit have said it sent him into a downward spiral. He became more withdrawn, distant, and seemed to be struggling mentally. The combination of losing someone so close, along with the physical wear and tear from years of wrestling, put a lot of pressure on him. That pressure, along with everything else he was dealing with, probably started breaking him down mentally and emotionally. Neuroscientist and former wrestler Christopher Nowinski believes Benoit's had too many untreated concussions, which might have slowly eaten away at his mental health. Nowinski pointed out that Benoit was one of the few wrestlers who willingly took chair shots to the back of his head, which was downright reckless. After testing Benoit's brain, Dr. Julian Bales, head of neurosurgery at West Virginia University, found that Benoit's brain was in such bad shape that it looked like it belonged to an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. Other tests revealed Benoit had severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, with damage spreading across all 4 lobes of his brain and brainstem. Bales and his team concluded that this kind of brain trauma could lead to dementia, which might trigger extreme behavioral issues. Benoit's father later suggested that this brain damage was likely the root cause of the tragic murder-suicide, but the WWE dismissed this as speculative. Nancy had also filed for divorce in May 2003, claiming abuse from Benoit, but withdrew the filing 3 months later. In 2008, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that Nancy may have suspected Benoit of having an affair with a female WWE wrestler, and the couple might have also fought over a life insurance policy. This information came from a report released by the Fayette County Sheriff's Office. There's no simple answer to what caused the Benoit family tragedy, but several theories have tried to make sense of how everything went so horribly wrong. WWE Chairman Vince McMahon weighed in on the tragedy, saying that it was a result of mental health issues combined with the brutal physical toll of Benoit's wrestling career. McMahon believes that Benoit's actions weren't just about steroids, but rather the damage done to his body and the emotional strain he was under. While McMahon's comments were controversial, it makes sense when you consider how wrestling affects people physically and mentally. Benoit was clearly struggling, and this was a tragic result of the years of stress, both physical and emotional, that he'd been under. A strange detail also surfaced when a statement about Nancy's death was added to the Chris Benoit Wikipedia page just 14 hours before police discovered the bodies of Benoit and his family. The update read, Chris Benoit was replaced by Johnny Nitro for the ECW World Championship match at Vengeance, as Benoit was not there due to personal issues stemming from the death of his wife Nancy. It was spotted by Wikinews and later picked up by Fox News. The addition was made at 4 a.m. on June 25th, nearly 10.5 hours before the bodies were discovered at 2:30 p.m. the same day. What's more bizarre is that the IP address of the editor traced back to Stamford, Connecticut, the WWE headquarters at the time. When this early report made its way into the media, the anonymous editor claimed it was just a huge coincidence and nothing more. But was it? We would love to know your thoughts in the comments section. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.